And I can start whenever. So this will be very spontaneous. It'll be so authentic. Sorry. My training is as a philosopher. Interestingly, that turned out to be super helpful for doing the kind of cultural analysis that I'm doing now. In some ways, I think it plays out what I learned from figures of a previous generation like Francis Schaeffer, who in a way was doing cultural analysis, but that always required that you deal with the ideas that are at work in a culture. And I think that's why I got drawn into philosophy. I think I've always been interested in how these things hit the ground. But you do start to realize that there's a kind of trickle-down effect. So one of the reasons why my work has gravitated towards considerations of postmodernism and those sorts of phenomena and challenges and opportunities is because I was trained in French phenomenology. My specialization is people like Jacques Derrida and Jean-François Lyotard, and I was drawn to that particular specialty because it seemed to have relevance for the sorts of phenomena that we bump into in what we call our postmodern context or our late modern context. That said, I think I was always learning philosophy alongside and with theological interests, and from the time I was a sophomore in college, I had read Alvin Plantinga's famous kind of manifesto called Advice to Christian Philosophers, which laid out a vision for me of how to be a Christian philosopher. So I don't think that philosophy is some neutral project. I think you can pursue it as a Christian. I guess what I wouldn't have anticipated is that philosophical work, and in particular engaging those French sorts of theorists, Foucault, Bourdieu, things like that, would actually press me to recognize that it's not just that ideas trickle down into a culture. It's that cultural practices kind of carry their own social imaginary. So there's also a kind of bubbling up from the rituals and rhythms and routines of a culture. And it was also philosophical sources that primed me to see that. So it's so strange in some ways that you can draw a line from my work on people like Foucault and Pierre Bourdieu as the impetus for what became my work on liturgy and worship, and then cultural liturgies and what I call secular liturgies. And in some sense, it was French atheists that became the catalyst for me to recover the centrality of Christian worship and Christian liturgy as the hub of Christian formation and cultural formation. So it's been in one way, it's a circuitous path, but in the other way, I can look back and sort of see how I was led to be prepared to do the sort of work that I'm doing now. The version of political engagement that gets manifest in the religious right has problems and challenges for Christian discipleship, because I think one of the great challenges is that you end up confusing the civil religion of a nation state with your Christianity, and in the States in particular, that gets really blurred. So because it's sort of the generation of my age and above that were really the movers and shakers in that, I see the next generation really responding to that. And they also don't want to retreat from concern with politics, but I see a sort of next generation of Christians who are very skeptical and very suspicious about the over-identification of Christian faith with ideological party politics. So you'll see them very concerned about justice, but they are not interested in signing up for the party lines of different parties, political parties, and so on and so forth. And you'll hear more and more talk about sort of being post-partisan. I think that's an encouraging trend. It's something that is a welcome sort of new distantiation from over-identification with political ideologies and agendas. That said, I do think that generation is in danger of getting not hoodwinked, but there is a temptation to, in the name of being post-partisan, actually get sort of hijacked by an agenda that is still kind of an ideological agenda, because you're reacting to the sort of conservative right-wing agenda of your parents, you know. So I think the real agenda going forward is for Christians to figure out how to be engaged and concerned for the common good, to not retreat into holy enclaves, but be the church for the common good in ways that don't give up on engagement with the political, but also don't put too much emphasis on the political. We need to build more networks and bridges to partner with organizations too that would give us an outlet and a voice to sort of play a role there without coming in as the, you know, the sage who's going to dictate what should happen, but to help the body of Christ to think alongside and with the body of Christ about these sorts of matters. And I guess it's also why I'm a teacher. I mean, to me, all of us who are educators are invested in trying to form and shape the next generation of leaders. Yeah, I mean, and Regent does this so much better than a lot of places. Regent College is the kind of place that is a think tank for the church. Do you know what I mean? And it's, but without being a sort of ivory tower. It's not an ivory tower fortress, you know, insulated and enclaved from the realities of that. So no, I think you guys have a great opportunity here. In some ways, the assumption that the political would be a-religious, that the public sphere would be secular, is a very modern idea. It's generated from this sense that the public sphere is a rational sphere, is a secular sphere, and therefore is not a space of religious voices, reasons, so on and so forth. However, I think that the assumptions that undergird that notion that you can be purely rational, objective, neutral, unbiased, has come under severe criticism. And this is part of the postmodern critique, I think, that ideal of the sort of objective, rational, neutral, unbiased agent, who, by the way, turns out to be a white man, is just not a sustainable picture. So what that means is that the postmodern entails a critique of the secular. If the secular is this neutral public sphere, and that's rooted in these modern assumptions about rationality, well, then the postmodern critique of those modern assumptions about rationality also has to engender a post-secular sensibility. That is, if the public sphere is going to be truly pluralist, it can't be secular in that sense, in the sense of being neutral. So this is why I think you see really interesting opportunities for Christian faith to be unapologetically present in the public sphere. However, secularism will die hard. Because, in other words, the last gasps of secularism as a doctrine in that sense will be the loudest. And in some sense, I think Canada is a place where secularism is much more alive and well as an agenda, as an exclusionary agenda, than it is even in a place like the United States. I think it's more complicated up here. I think it's much more assumed that religion is a private reality that you sort of keep for weekends. And that is to be operating with a very modernist set of assumptions about the political, I think. A lot of Christians would do well to stop overemphasizing federal politics. That is, let's stop thinking that politics is only federal or only presidential. In his book, Bad Religion, one of the great insights that Ross Douthat makes is that Americans have come to develop this certain cult of the presidency. So the reason why there's such a fixation on presidential elections is because we actually overestimate what could be accomplished by a president. I also think we just tend to only think of the political at the federal level, and because of that, we abandon the much more concrete significance and proximity of municipal government, of municipal politics, of provincial and state politics. And I think that it would be very interesting to see what it would look like if a generation of Christians stopped thinking the goal was to get to Ottawa or Washington. The reason why I think Christians should be attuned to and interested in the politics of the local is because there is something about the realities of the gospel and the incarnation. The incarnation is local. There's something about the reality of inhabiting place that, and federal politics is, for the most part, a completely abstract entity. The nation state is an abstract entity. My neighborhood is not. There's a concretion about that. I guess it's one of the reasons why I think there's so much resonance between this sort of Christian investment in concrete communities and Wendell Berry's vision for sort of the importance of a localist project. I think there's a lot of reasons to build bridges between that. Maybe it simply comes from this. On the one hand, we talk about the Church Catholic, but on the other hand, you'd never have it except in congregations. And there's something about the reality of parish, that congregations, this unfortunately is also something that's lost in our commuter mega-churchized culture, but I think there was always a kind of political wisdom in the church's understanding of the parish. Here is this instantiation of the worldwide body of Christ in this corner of the world, in this neighborhood, who have a school, who have a food bank, who care for the poor in this neighborhood. I think that carries a political sensibility with it that could then translate into this investment in municipal and provincial and state politics.